Suppose I told you that the well-known Bible might be missing vital details regarding creation, the lives of the patriarchs, and even the divine laws given by God. The Book of Jubilees, preserved within the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, claims to address these gaps by uncovering concealed stories and offering a deeper understanding of God's overarching plan. However, an intriguing fact is that this ancient text was banned from most of the Christian world. In today's discussion, we will delve into the mysterious Book of Jubilees, also called Little Genesis, and investigate why its 50 chapters were excluded from the mainstream Christian canon. This text contains forgotten details about the Genesis account, providing a cosmic perspective on how angels, celestial timing, and hidden commandments were transmitted to mankind. But the book's revelations go beyond that. It even challenges the commonly accepted calendar system, asserting that the current way of measuring time is flawed and that God originally bestowed a sacred time structure on humanity, which most people ignore today. So the question arises, why did the early church reject this ancient manuscript? What secrets does it hold that were considered too controversial to be embraced by mainstream Christianity? The Book of Jubilees begins with a retelling of the creation narrative as known from Genesis, but extends far beyond what most Bibles present. According to the text, when God created the universe, his role was not just to bring life into existence. He also established the very framework of time, aligning it with divine principles. This is where the idea of sacred time emerges. Unlike the Gregorian calendar most of us use, Jubilees introduces a specific solar calendar supervised by celestial angels, which sequences the universe's cosmic cycles. This calendar isn't merely for counting days, but is designed to enable humanity to live in harmonious obedience to God's will. Jubilees claims that humanity was intended to follow this divinely ordained calendar, comprising 364 days split evenly into 4 seasons of 91 days each. This perfect system ensures that sacred observances, such as the Sabbath and various festivals, always occur on the correct dates. However, this precise calendar has been forgotten or discarded by most civilizations over time. The narrative begins with the creation of the earth, but expands to provide a broader cosmic view. Before the physical world came into existence, angels were created on the first day of creation. These angels hold crucial responsibilities in governing the universe, including overseeing celestial movements and seasons. The book reveals that God assigned specific tasks to these angelic beings. Some were tasked with regulating natural phenomena, such as the sun, moon, and stars, ensuring they follow divine paths. Others acted as messengers or enforcers of God's laws. The concept of angels managing the heavens echoes in other ancient texts, but Jubilees emphasizes how these angelic entities serve as custodians of divine order, holding the universe in balance and ensuring that the celestial bodies follow their appointed courses. According to the text, the sun's movement was intentionally aligned with the seasonal divisions of the year. This divine orchestration was essential for maintaining cosmic harmony, and when humans deviated from God's chronological plan, chaos ensued. A central theme of Jubilees is that angels do not solely watch over humans, but also control the very fabric of time itself. When mankind strays from God's ordained schedule, disorder and chaos result, highlighting how integral these celestial guardians are to maintaining cosmic stability. This intertwining of angelic influence and the passage of time underscores the importance of adhering to divine timing. The book emphasizes that humans' failure to follow this sacred calendar has led to widespread disorientation and deviation from God's original design. One of the most provocative aspects of Jubilees is its outspoken stance on the calendar system. It insists that the traditional lunar-based calendar many cultures, including the Israelites, eventually adopted is flawed, and that the only authentic measurement of time is solar. The text argues that the solar calendar, governed by divine angels, is the true and correct way to mark days, seasons, and sacred festivals. Jubilees presents this calendar not just as a tool for timekeeping, but as a divine gift that aligns human life with God's divine rhythm, an alignment that has been lost or ignored over millennia. Throughout this discourse, Jubilees underscores how the rejection of this sacred calendar, along with the understanding of celestial and divine laws, resulted in spiritual and societal chaos. Its teachings challenge orthodox views, suggesting that much of modern time measurement is disconnected from divine truth. The implications are profound. If humanity had maintained or restored this divine solar calendar, perhaps the world wouldn't be so fragmented or out of sync with sacred order. The book's emphasis on sacred time and angelic oversight aims to restore a lost understanding of divine cosmic law, one that aligns human existence with the heavenly realm and God's eternal plan. In conclusion, the Book of Jubilees offers an alternative cosmic perspective on creation, divine laws, and timekeeping that diverges sharply from the mainstream biblical narrative. Its teachings about celestial governance, sacred time, and the divine structure of the universe present a compelling argument for a forgotten or suppressed divine blueprint. A blueprint that once governed humanity, but has been obscured over centuries. The reasons behind its rejection by the early church likely involve its controversial assertions about calendar reform and the unseen angelic order. These teachings threaten established religious and societal structures, possibly explaining why the book was banned and why its profound insights remain largely hidden from most of Christianity today, because it aligns perfectly with God's divine order. The book explains that the solar year comprises 364 days, divided into 52 complete weeks. Each season, spring, summer, autumn, and winter, contains exactly 13 weeks, totaling 91 days per season. This precise structure guarantees that the observance of the Sabbath and other sacred festivals consistently occurs on the correct days every year. This solar calendar bears a remarkable resemblance to the Ethiopian calendar, which remains in use today within the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The Ethiopian calendar divides the year into 13 months, 12 months of 30 days each, and an additional month called Pagum, which has 5 or 6 days to account for the remaining days needed to complete the year. Could it be that the Ethiopian calendar remains one of the few modern systems that still mirror the sacred timing described in the Book of Jubilees? In contrast, the lunar calendar, adopted by numerous ancient civilizations, including the Israelites, is viewed as a deviation from this divine order. The lunar calendar's irregular nature causes months and festivals to shift over time. Jubilees warns that straying from the solar calendar results in spiritual disorder, emphasizing that some will observe the moon but will disrupt the seasons and create an abomination, a day of testimony. The text in Jubilees states that following, the lunar calendar isn't simply an error, but constitutes disobedience to God's divine plan. The narrative advocates that by reverting to the solar calendar, humanity can realign itself with the sacred rhythms established during creation. The Book of Jubilees reaffirms the traditional account of a 6-day creation as found in Genesis, but it offers additional insights into the first Sabbath. According to Jubilees, God's rest on the 7th day was not merely a pause, but a sanctification, making it a divine institution and an eternal law bestowed upon both humans and angels. The Sabbath is depicted as the cornerstone of time itself, a day set apart at the very inception of creation, designed to be observed perpetually. This concept of the Sabbath as a cosmic principle is fundamental within Jubilees. It not only governs the weekly cycle, but also connects to a larger temporal framework, including the Jubilee cycles of 49 years. These cycles are intended to restore harmony to the world, providing periods of rest, release, and renewal for the land, the people, and even the heavenly realm. The text emphasizes that God sanctified and blessed the seventh day as a sign of holiness for all his works, symbolizing an everlasting covenant. The focus on the Sabbath as an eternal law underscores that Jubilees is not merely a retelling of Genesis. Rather, it reveals the deeper spiritual significance woven into the cycles of time that orchestrate the order of all creation. The narrative states that Adam was created on the sixth day, consistent with Genesis, but it adds layers of detail to his story. According to Jubilees, after creating Adam, God initially gave him specific commandments from the outset. Rules that included observing the Sabbath, adhering to purity laws, and following guidelines concerning marriage and worship. These divine laws, delivered by angels, were intended for Adam and his descendants as part of the covenant established between God and humanity. While Genesis describes God's direct interactions with Adam, Jubilees introduces angels, particularly those called the angels of the presence, as mediators. These celestial beings serve to instruct Adam on how to observe God's commandments, ensuring that both he and Eve comprehend the laws related to holiness, sacrifice, and moral conduct. It is through these angelic teachers that humanity receives its foundational understanding of divine law, emphasizing the heavenly origin and divine intention behind the commands given at creation. On the sixth day of the second week, by God's instructions, all the animals and creatures on earth were brought before Adam. This included every kind of beast, all cattle, all birds, and everything that moves upon the land, as well as every living creature in the waters. These creatures were presented to Adam according to their respective kinds. The beasts on the first day, the cattle on the second day, the birds on the third day, and all terrestrial creatures on the fourth day, with the aquatic creatures on the fifth day. This account is detailed in Jubilees chapters 31 and 32. The interaction with angels during this process served to reinforce a profound concept that God's law is not merely a human invention, but is embedded within the celestial order. The angels acted as messengers to instruct Adam that he was bound to uphold God's commandments as an everlasting covenant, identical to the laws observed within the heavenly realm. This raises the question, could it be that the divine laws imparted by angels to humanity were given long before Moses entered the scene and received the Ten Commandments? If so, what lessons might we glean from these ancient laws, those given to Adam, especially when we compare them with the commandments handed down through Moses? If you're interested in exploring more about the divine laws bestowed upon Adam and their similarities to the laws of Moses, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Would you like us to examine more thoroughly the ancient commandments that have been passed down since creation's earliest days, especially after the fall of Adam and Eve? The Book of Jubilees offers additional insights into the story of Cain and Abel, providing details beyond what Genesis recounts. While Genesis describes Cain murdering Abel, Jubilees elaborates on what occurred after this tragic event. The murder of Abel is recognized as the first serious violation of God's law, marking a significant breach that carries spiritual repercussions for all humanity. Although Cain is banished from God's presence, Jubilees emphasizes that the righteous lineage of mankind continues through Seth, Adam's third son. In Jubilees, Seth is depicted as a symbol of righteousness, being instructed in the laws ordained by the angels. This portrayal sets the foundation for subsequent generations, including Noah, to uphold the covenant with God. The story of Noah and the flood, familiar from Genesis, is further illuminated in Jubilees with additional revelations regarding events before and after the catastrophe. The focus extends beyond Noah's survival to reveal the covenant God establishes with him afterward, one that highlights the importance of purity, righteousness, and adherence to God's laws. Before the flood, Jubilees delves deeper into the earth's corruption, especially spotlighting the Nephilim, offspring born from fallen angels and human women. Genesis 6:1-4 briefly mentions these giants, but Jubilees provides a richer context, illustrating how these giants contributed to the increasing wickedness on earth. This degeneracy prompted divine intervention. The earth was overwhelmed with lawlessness, to the point where the entire creation was corrupt. It is said that all flesh corrupted its way, with mankind, cattle, animals, birds, and every creature on the land and in the waters having fallen into disobedience and disorder. This moral decay was not solely a result of human sin, but also a consequence of the influence exerted by fallen angels who introduced forbidden knowledge and disturbed the natural order. In response, God acted swiftly, sending the flood as a means to eradicate the pervasive corruption. Nonetheless, amidst this divine judgment, Noah and his family were preserved because of their righteousness. Jubilees emphasizes that God's response was not only punitive, but also restorative. After the flood, he made a new covenant with Noah, promising never again to destroy the earth with a flood. This covenant included specific laws concerning purity and sacrificial rituals. These laws, later transmitted to the Israelites, were intended to help humanity sustain righteousness and order by God's divine plan. Holiness and the avoidance of corruption that ultimately led to the flood are central themes in the Book of Jubilees. A significant detail within this text is that Noah was commanded to observe the Sabbath and adhere to the same commandments concerning sacrifice and purity that had been established with Adam. This covenant represented a fresh start for human beings, emphasizing the necessity of steadfast obedience to God's laws to avert future divine judgment. The laws about sacrifice, which would later be formalized through the Mosaic covenant, were already part of Noah's observances under this agreement. These directives included detailed instructions on how to offer burnt offerings to God and maintain purity, both physically and spiritually. In Genesis 12, we are introduced to Abram, later Abraham, upon God's call for him to leave his homeland and journey to Canaan. However, Jubilees delves deeper into Abraham's youth, revealing a richer dimension to his narrative. According to Jubilee traditions, Abraham was raised in a family deeply entrenched in idol worship. In this account, his father, Terah, served false gods, an aspect not explicitly mentioned in the biblical Genesis text. Jubilees vividly describes a young Abraham who actively rejects the pagan rituals surrounding him, choosing instead to follow the one true God. The text recounts how Abraham confronted his father, asking, "Father, what is this idol you worship?" And upon seeing the idol was made of stone, Abraham burned it before all witnesses and fled into the wilderness. An act of defiance that signifies his spiritual rebellion. This passage from Jubilees 11, 16, 17 highlights how Abraham's rejection of idolatry was not merely obedience, but a revolutionary act against the false gods of his culture. While Genesis emphasizes Abraham's obedience to God's command to leave his homeland, Jubilees portrays him as a courageous reformer who challenges the prevalent pagan religious practices. This act of spiritual rebellion in his youth set the foundation for Abraham's later role as the patriarch of the chosen people, who would adhere to God's laws and reject pagan customs. One of the most notable distinctions between Genesis and Jubilees is the portrayal of Abraham as an individual who was already a follower of divine laws long before the life of Moses. The biblical account in Genesis does not mention any laws given to Abraham aside from the covenant of circumcision detailed in Genesis 17. Conversely, Jubilees depicts Abraham as someone who already upheld the Sabbath-made sacrifices and observed other laws that are traditionally associated with Moses. According to Jubilees, these statutes were not new inventions of the Mosaic era. Instead, they were divine commandments passed down from angels to the patriarchs, starting with Adam. Abraham received these directives from celestial beings, and they were integral to his covenantal relationship with God. It was taught to him by angels, who revealed to him the contents inscribed on the tablets of heaven, an idea presented in Jubilees 12:25. In Genesis, Abraham's actions are primarily presented as part of his personal faith journey, a response to God's call. However, Jubilees frames Abram within a cosmic divine plan, suggesting that he was guided by celestial messengers. The laws he observed were depicted as part of a divine order that governs not only heaven, but earth as well. These laws encompassed the Sabbath and various purity statutes that Moses would later formalize in the law. One of the most significant moments in Abraham's story is the covenant of circumcision. In Genesis 17, God commands Abraham to circumcise himself and all the males in his household as a sign of this everlasting covenant. Jubilees expands on this command, asserting that the act was not merely symbolic, but a fulfillment of a divine law inscribed on the heavenly tablets. In this account, circumcision is portrayed as more than a ritual practice. It is a divine decree established at creation. This law was not a newly introduced rite, but an eternal divine standard that predated the Israelites and was embedded into the fabric of creation itself. According to Jubilees, the covenant of circumcision was inscribed on the celestial tablets, making it a universal and eternal decree written in the heavenly record of divine laws. God's divine blueprint for creation encompasses comprehensive laws that regulate both celestial beings and humans, and these laws are meant to endure through all generations without exception. According to this divine ordinance, there are no designated days for circumcision, nor are any days to be skipped, such as passing over one of the 8 days. This practice, established and inscribed on the heavenly tablets, is an eternal commandment. This is explicitly stated in Jubilees 15:25, which emphasizes the timeless nature of this law. In the book of Genesis, the emphasis primarily lies on Abraham's obedience to God's commands. However, Jubilees presents this act of circumcision as part of a more extensive divine framework, an integral element of the cosmic order intended by the Creator. The observance of circumcision transcends its physical aspect. It symbolizes a spiritual alignment, a means of tuning oneself by the universal laws that sustain the cosmic balance. The narrative of the binding of Isaac, known as the Akedah, stands out as one of the most profound and intense episodes in Genesis. Genesis 22:1-19. In this story, God tests Abraham's faith by commanding him to sacrifice his son, Isaac. Jubilees revisits this story, but adds layers of spiritual and cosmic significance. In its retelling, the test is not merely a personal trial for Abraham, it is embedded within a grander spiritual conflict. Jubilees introduces the concept that the test is part of a cosmic spiritual warfare where celestial forces are involved. According to this perspective, the angel master, an entity associated with Satan, plays a role in proposing the test to God, with the sinister hope that Abraham would fail. Master symbolizes the forces of evil that relentlessly attempt to thwart righteousness. The text explains that divine intervention occurs during the binding, when angels intervene, and God permits this test to demonstrate that Abraham's faith surpasses the temptations and schemes of evil. Jubilees records that God, addressing Master and the prince of the angels of darkness, declares that Abraham's faith has been proven and commands the angel not to harm Isaac. And I stood before him and before the prince of Master, and the Lord said, "Command him not to lay his hand on the lad, nor to do anything to him, for I have shown that he fears the Lord." Jubilees 18:10. This version of the story elevates it to a spiritual battlefield, emphasizing that Abraham's unwavering faith is ultimately a victory not only for him, but for divine righteousness over evil. Unlike the straightforward narrative in Genesis, which concentrates on Abraham's act of obedience, Jubilees frames this story within a cosmic contest involving celestial and spiritual powers. It highlights that divine intervention reveals faithfulness as a key weapon in the cosmic struggle between goodness and evil. Master acts as an agent of opposition, trying to lead Abraham astray, but divine grace intervenes to affirm that fidelity to divine commandments will always triumph over evil temptations. This enforces the understanding that Abraham's act of faith is part of a larger divine scheme, one that includes celestial forces fighting for righteousness and cosmic balance. In Genesis, the focus shifts to the individual destinies of Jacob and Esau, emphasizing that even before their birth, divine knowledge revealed their future roles. The text in Genesis 25:23 states that before they were born, God disclosed to their mother Rebekah that the twin brothers would become ancestors of two nations, with the older Esau destined to serve the younger Jacob. Jubilees expands upon this prophecy, emphasizing that it was not simply a family rivalry, but part of a divine cosmic order. It suggests that Jacob was always predestined to inherit the spiritual blessing and continue the righteous lineage initiated through Abraham. Jubilees introduces the concept of divine predetermination, revealing that Jacob's election was decreed from birth and that his actions, even if deceptive, were part of fulfilling this divine plan. Esau's divergence, meanwhile, was also foreordained, reflecting a divine design that included potential rebellion from his rebellious nature. The text further notes that Isaac and Rebekah possessed divine knowledge about Esau's rebellious tendencies and the future opposition of his descendants to Israel and the divine covenant. God told Rebekah during her pregnancy, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples will be separated from within you. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." Jubilees 19:13, referencing Genesis 25:23. This prophecy shows the long-term cosmic struggle between disparate divine and earthly forces. In Genesis, the story unfolds through Jacob's cleverness and Esau's impulsiveness. But Jubilees interprets Jacob's inheritance of the birthright as part of a divine, predetermined plan. Jacob's cunning and actions are seen as tactics within a divine blueprint, aligning his deeds with the overarching purpose of fulfilling God's covenant, even if his methods appear deceptive. The crucial difference presented in Jubilees is that Jacob's role as the chosen individual was not coincidental, but rooted in divine predestination, emphasizing that divine election and the unfolding of history follow a divine design deeply embedded in celestial and spiritual realities, more than merely depicting Esau as a brother who forfeited his birthright. The Jubilees writings underscore that Esau embodies a lineage characterized by defiance against God's designated people. His descendants are depicted as a nation that will rise in opposition to Israel, thus fulfilling the ancient prophecy that the elder sibling will serve the younger. While Genesis points out the ongoing hostility between Esau and Jacob following the incidents involving the blessings and birthright specifically noted in Genesis 27:41, the Jubilees expand upon this theme by illustrating how Esau's progeny would evolve into a nation actively opposing Jacob's line, the future Israelites. This perspective fits into the larger cosmic struggle, which the Jubilees often highlight, the ongoing battle between righteousness, represented by Jacob, and rebellion, embodied by Esau. According to the texts, Esau, also called Edom, took his family, his wives and children, and all he possessed, migrating to the southeastern mountainous regions of the land. Thus Esau's descendants established themselves there, forming a distinct nation. The Jubilees explicitly state that Esau's rebellion was not a mere personal act, but a national rebellion, signifying that his descendants would become a people, engaged in numerous conflicts with Israel, reflecting the spiritual battle that originates from their ancestral roots. As the narrative progresses, it is noted that Edom settled in the southeastern hill country, reinforcing the idea that Esau's defiance extended beyond personal rivalry. This opposition would translate into persistent struggles with the Israelites, symbolizing a spiritual warfare rooted in their ancestral history. One meaningful episode in Jacob's life, highlighted by the scriptures, is the reception of his divine blessing from Isaac, which is detailed in Genesis. This blessing confers upon Jacob the role of the progenitor of the 12 tribes of Israel, ensuring his central place in biblical history. However, the Jubilees account enhances this event by emphasizing that Jacob's blessing was not merely a paternal gift, but also a divine transmission of eternal laws. According to Jubilees, following Jacob's blessing, God and his angels reveal to him the divine statutes that he and his descendants are bound to uphold. These laws include commands for the observance of the Sabbath, purity regulations, and a sacred calendar, elements that later become formalized within Mosaic law. This framing casts Jacob not just as a recipient of a birthright, but as the guardian of divine commandments, entrusted with the responsibility of ensuring that future Israelites adhere to their covenant with God. The revelation of these laws to Jacob occurs as God appears to him at night, affirming his relationship to the divine covenant. I am the Lord, the God of Abraham and Isaac. The land where you are sleeping I will give to you and your descendants, and your descendants shall be as numerous as the stars of heaven. Jubilees 27:23, Genesis 28:12-15. In the Jubilees narrative, this divine promise is intertwined with the visions of the ladder and God's covenant in Genesis, emphasizing that the laws bestowed upon Jacob are elements of a cosmic order that governs both heaven and earth. By portraying Jacob as inheriting and safeguarding these divine laws, the text elevates his role beyond mere inheritance. He becomes the custodian of God's eternal commandments, linking him to the heavenly tablets mentioned earlier in the narrative. The scope of the Jubilees narrative extends beyond the personal rivalry between Jacob and Esau. It frames this historical conflict within a prophetic vision of an ongoing cosmic struggle between their descendants. The book indicates that nations emerging from Esau will continually oppose the lineage of Jacob, the Israelites, throughout history. This depiction underscores that the rivalry is more than a territorial dispute. It's a spiritual conflict between righteousness, symbolized by Jacob and Israel, and rebellion, represented by Esau and Edom. In Jubilees, this prophetic conflict is part of a greater cosmic war, which aligns with apocalyptic themes and the ultimate battle between good and evil. Thus, the descendants of Esau are portrayed as nations destined to be enemies of God's chosen people, and this tension is depicted as persisting throughout biblical history. The spiritual opposition between Israel and Esau's lineage is pivotal within Jubilees' eschatological vision, emphasizing that their conflict is tied to the ultimate cosmic drama of divine judgment and the final reconciliation. The narrative, therefore, frames Esau's line as a symbol of rebellion, an enduring force opposed to divine righteousness, highlighting that the struggle between these two lines of descent reflects the broader spiritual cosmic warfare anticipated in the end times. On that day, Jacob and his sons descended into Egypt to meet Joseph, while Esau's descendants remained in the land of Edom. From that point onward, the persistent hostility between the nations endured. This event is referenced in Jubilees 4:53 and also in Genesis 33:16, where it is noted that Esau began his journey home after their encounter. This depiction of an ongoing spiritual conflict echoes the larger themes within Jubilees, which portray the stories of the patriarchs as part of a grand cosmic design, one that encompasses not only the family of Abraham, but also the destinies of entire nations and the final confrontation between good and evil. In Genesis, we see the origins of Jacob's 12 sons, born through his wives Leah and Rachel, along with their maidservants. These 12, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin, become the founders of the tribes of Israel. However, Jubilees offer an added layer of divine sovereignty over their births, portraying them as events arranged by divine decree rather than mere human relationships. According to this perspective, the timing and order of each son's birth were predetermined by God to correspond with the sacred calendar. The text emphasizes that each child was born according to a divine timetable, integrating their birth into a larger cosmic scheme. Their mothers, Leah, Rachel, and their maidservants, gave birth to these children at moments aligned with God's plan, with their destinies inscribed on the heavenly tablets. This idea aligns with Jubilees 28:12 and echoes the narratives in Genesis 29:31 through 30:34, which detail the births of Jacob's sons. While Genesis mainly recounts the events surrounding each birth, Jubilees underscores that these births were inscribed in heaven, reinforcing the notion that the 12 tribes were part of God's predestined design for the world. Among the notable stories in Genesis is that of Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, who loses that privileged status due to a grave sin. Genesis 35:22 mentions Reuben's failure, and Jubilees expands upon this event, highlighting its spiritual implications. The text interprets Reuben's misconduct as a violation of divine laws established long before his action, making his sin not just a personal failing, but a spiritual transgression that disqualifies him from leadership within the tribes. This shift enables Judah and Levi to assume prominent roles, Judah as the tribe's spearhead and Levi as the priestly lineage, fitting into the divine order ordained by God. Because of Reuben's sin, he is no longer considered the primary heir, and Judah is chosen as the prince over his brothers, with Levi designated for the priesthood forever. This transition and positioning are detailed in Genesis 49:3-4 and Jubilees 33:10, where Reuben's disqualification is emphasized strongly, reflecting its alignment with the cosmos's larger divine plan. In Genesis, Judah's ascendancy and Levi's priestly role are presented as natural developments following Reuben's disqualification. Jubilees, however, frame these shifts within an eternal divine law, highlighting that Judah's rise and Levi's priesthood are part of a divine, unchangeable order. Levi's priesthood, originating from Moses and Aaron, descendants from this tribe, is seen in Exodus 28 as a central divine institution. Jubilees stresses that Levi's role as the priestly tribe is rooted in a divine mandate that predates the formal establishment of the Levitical priesthood in Moses' time. The book emphasizes that God chose Levi for this spiritual office long before it was institutionalized, reinforcing that Levi's priestly authority is rooted in heaven's eternal decree rather than solely in human action. This perspective underscores that the priesthood is part of a cosmic plan, established in the heavenly tablets, emphasizing the spiritual dimension that governs Israel's religious leadership beyond mere tribal duty. The leader of the tribes bore the crucial responsibility of ensuring the observance of divine laws. His priestly duties are depicted as integral to maintaining cosmic harmony, conferring upon him special duties that serve to link the heavens with the earthly realm. Levi, in particular, was dedicated for all eternity to the priesthood, tasked with offering sacrifices and acting as a mediator between the people and the divine sovereign. This divine appointment was inscribed on the heavenly tablets, as recorded in Jubilees 32:17, and is referenced in the biblical books of Genesis and Exodus. While Genesis and Exodus highlight the Levitical priesthood during Moses' era, Jubilees emphasizes that Levi's priestly function was embedded within God's eternal plan from the very beginning. This perspective elevates Levi's priesthood from a mere reactionary institution to an essential element of the divine cosmic order predating the events at Mount Sinai. According to Genesis, the sons of Jacob, referred to as the 12 tribes, eventually became the heads of Israel's tribes, and their journeys are chronicled as they settle in the Promised Land. However, Jubilees portrays the tribes not solely as land heirs, but as custodians of God's commandments, charged with safeguarding divine laws handed down from Abraham and Isaac. Each tribe in Jubilees is assigned a unique spiritual duty, responsibilities rooted in upholding the divine statutes inscribed on the heavenly tablets. The text underscores that these tribes were chosen not merely for territorial inheritance, but to serve as divine stewards, ensuring that God's commandments were obeyed throughout all generations. The Lord explicitly stated to Jacob that these laws for his descendants are to be preserved forever, recorded on the heavenly tablets, so that they may walk in them and live, reaffirming the eternal nature of this divine mandate. Jubilees 29:6, Genesis 49. While Genesis recounts Jacob blessing his sons and describes their leadership roles within Israel, Jubilees elaborates further by suggesting that they were also entrusted with the sacred duty to perpetuate the divine laws to future generations. Each tribe thus assumes a divine role within the cosmic order, tying their earthly actions to Israel's spiritual destiny. Turning to the narrative of Joseph's brothers, Genesis recounts how they sold Joseph into slavery out of jealousy motivated by their father Jacob's favoritism, described in Genesis 37. In contrast, Jubilees reframes this act as a cosmic event with profound spiritual ramifications. The betrayal by Joseph's brothers is depicted as more than a familial grievance. It is portrayed as a serious offense against the divine order itself. Their guilt is portrayed as extending beyond personal guilt to encompass a violation of divine law inscribed on the heavenly tablets. According to Jubilees, the act of selling Joseph is considered a grave sin, an egregious transgression against God's heavenly commandments. The brothers are warned that unless they repent, they will face divine punishment. This stands in contrast to Genesis, where their jealousy and guilt are largely confined to personal and familial consequences. In Jubilees, their treachery has cosmic significance. It disrupts the divine plan and breaches the divine order. Their betrayal is recorded as a transgression against eternal laws, with the implication that their descendants will endure suffering until they repent for their sin. Jubilees 34:4-9. The focus on the heavenly tablets underscores that their misdeeds are woven into the larger fabric of the cosmic order, linking their actions to future suffering for Israel, particularly the Egyptian bondage. Their betrayal becomes a prelude to God's plan for the redemption of Israel through the Exodus, an event preordained within the divine realm. Regarding Joseph's rise to prominence in Egypt, Genesis attributes his success to his wisdom and gift in interpreting dreams, as described in Genesis 41. Jubilees expands upon this narrative by providing a broader perspective, implying that Joseph's rise was not only due to personal skill, but also part of a divine plan intricately woven into the cosmic order, emphasizing that his abilities and subsequent position in Egypt were foreordained within the divine realm. Joseph's ascent to power is depicted as an integral part of a divine blueprint inscribed upon the heavenly tablets. His achievements in Egypt were not solely a matter of personal talent, but rather the fulfillment of a divine preordainment that designated him as the savior of the Israelites. The Jubilees Chronicle underscores that Joseph's rise was orchestrated within the celestial design to set in motion the events leading up to the Exodus. His destiny was to direct his family into Egypt, where they would eventually fall into slavery, only to be rescued through God's miraculous intervention. According to this perspective, it was inscribed in the heavenly tablets that Joseph would govern Egypt, and through his leadership, the children of Israel would be preserved from famine. However, this deliverance would be temporary, as they would remain in Egypt for a significant period. This portrayal positions Joseph's life as a cosmic event, serving a purpose far greater than his personal story. His ascent functions as a vital component of God's overarching plan for Israel's salvation. The Book of Jubilees explicitly connects Joseph's success to the divine order of heaven, emphasizing that his rise was not a matter of chance or mere human ability, but an act of divine preordination. An especially notable aspect of Jubilees is its incorporation of angelic beings into Joseph's narrative. While Genesis highlights Joseph's close relationship with God, particularly through the dreams he received, Jubilees advances this idea by including the active involvement of angels who guide and safeguard him throughout his journey. According to Jubilees, angels were dispatched by God from the very beginning, starting from the moment Joseph was sold into slavery, to oversee his life and ensure his divine destiny in Egypt. These heavenly messengers played crucial roles at pivotal moments, intervening to protect Joseph from harm and to maintain his faithfulness to God. The Lord sent angels to accompany Joseph on his perilous journey to Egypt, demonstrating how valuable his life was in the eyes of divine authority. His path, as described, had already been inscribed in the heavenly tablets, underscoring the notion that his life was part of a divine script. Jubilees 34:21. This emphasis on angelic guardianship introduces a spiritual layer absent from the Genesis account, transforming Joseph's journey from a series of fortunate events to a carefully orchestrated divine plan. It portrays angels not just as passive witnesses, but as active participants ensuring Joseph's rise to power and the salvation of his family. A central difference between Genesis and Jubilees lies in how Joseph's life is linked to the larger destiny of the Israelites, particularly the Exodus. In Genesis, Joseph's story concludes with his family settling in Egypt, marking an end to his narrative. Conversely, Jubilees views Joseph's life as prophetic, serving as a foreshadowing of the impending enslavement and eventual deliverance of the Israelites. The text asserts that Joseph's rise was inherently connected to a divine prophecy that foreshadowed the future bondage and liberation of his descendants. It suggests that Joseph was conscious of this future, and his actions contributed to the fulfillment of this divine plan. Joseph himself proclaims to his brothers that although he will die, God's promise to their ancestors remains certain. I will die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Do not fear, for these things have been written and sealed on the heavenly tablets. Jubilees 46:9. This statement underscores Joseph's awareness that his life and death are part of a divine narrative that extends beyond his existence, reflecting a prophetic awareness of Israel's future deliverance. While the Genesis account depicts Joseph's death as the conclusion of his story, Jubilees interprets it as a transitional point, marking the beginning of Israel's period of enslavement, but also serving as a prophetic promise of eventual liberation. Joseph's death is thus seen not solely as a personal end, but as a divine milestone within the larger cosmic plan of redemption. His life is explicitly placed within this divine framework, which ultimately culminates in the Exodus. In Genesis, the Israelites' bondage begins with the arrival of a new Pharaoh who does not recognize Joseph's contributions, setting the stage for their enslavement. However, Jubilees emphasizes that this period of suffering was preordained within the divine script, integral to the divine plan for Israel's deliverance. Every detail of Joseph's life, including his rise to power and subsequent death, is interwoven with the divine purpose of guiding Israel toward its ultimate redemption. The account affirms that the unfolding of these events was not incidental, but intricately arranged by God, with angelic guardianship and divine decree ensuring that his promises would be fulfilled in their proper time. The rise of a ruler, unfamiliar with Joseph and his contributions, marks the beginning of renewed oppression against the Israelites, as described in Exodus 1:18 through 4:14. However, within the perspective of the Book of Jubilees, this period of enforced servitude is interpreted as part of a grand cosmic prophecy that had been inscribed on the heavenly tablets long before it unfolded. According to Jubilees, God's foreknowledge had already disclosed the bondage of Israel long in advance, and this suffering was woven into his divine blueprint to ultimately guide them toward liberation through the Exodus and the revelation of the Mosaic Law. This prophetic design intricately links to Joseph's initial role in bringing Israel into Egypt. While Joseph's survival saved his family from famine, their subsequent stay in Egypt was predestined to culminate in enforced slavery. Such suffering would serve as a divine demonstration of his mighty power in delivering his chosen people, as it was preordained on the heavenly tablets that Israel would undergo oppression in Egypt, only to be rescued by God's mighty hand through signs and wonders that would glorify his name. This understanding elevates the Israelites' time in Egypt beyond a mere historical account, framing it as a crucial element of a larger spiritual narrative where their enslavement and eventual liberation are part of a pre-established divine plan aimed at magnifying God's glory. Their affliction is portrayed as a necessary divine trial, designed to prepare Israel to receive the sacred laws at Mount Sinai, as depicted in the book of Exodus. The narrative shows God acting directly to orchestrate the plagues and lead his people out of Pharaoh's grasp, with Exodus chapters 7 to 12 recounting these divine interventions. Nonetheless, Jubilees introduces an additional spiritual dimension to this story, portraying a cosmic conflict involving angels as key agents in the struggle between divine forces and earthly rulers. In Jubilees, Israel's oppression is not merely a political act, but part of a spiritual warfare between good and evil. A figure often associated with Satan, called Matima, is depicted as actively working to harden Pharaoh's heart and intensify Israel's suffering. Master and his evil spirits are described as encouraging the Egyptian authorities to escalate their cruelty, testing the fidelity of Israel to the divine commandments. The Prince of Master is portrayed as actively opposing Israel, seeking to entrap them in harsh bondage and cause them to abandon their faith in the Lord. According to Jubilees, this cosmic opposition underscores that Israel's enslavement was not only a political event, but also a spiritual confrontation, with forces of darkness attempting to thwart God's plan for their deliverance. This perspective emphasizes that the biblical plagues of Egypt were more than divine judgments. They were also manifestations of a cosmic struggle. Master and his demonic allies are depicted as striving to prevent the Exodus, indicating that behind the physical events lay a spiritual battleground. Central to this cosmic conflict are the heavenly tablets, which are said to contain the detailed divine blueprint for the laws, the timing of the Exodus, and the divine order itself. Jubilees suggests that Israel's liberation was not a spontaneous response to their suffering, but a carefully orchestrated event prearranged according to the divine timetable inscribed on these celestial records. The narrative underscores that the timing of the Exodus was deeply connected to the observance of sacred laws, with God's intention to bring his people into harmony with the divine cosmic order through their deliverance. According to Jubilees, every aspect of Israel's sojourn in Egypt, from their suffering to their ultimate liberation, was predetermined, with God's actions perfectly synchronized with the cosmic timeline. It is explicitly stated that it was inscribed in the heavenly tablets that on the 14th day of the first month, at the predetermined moment, God would bring Israel out of Egypt. This date is highlighted as highly significant, a day set apart by creation itself. This specific detail is a distinctive feature of Jubilees, setting it apart from the book of Exodus, which focuses primarily on the sequence of events leading up to and during the plagues. Jubilees, on the other hand, emphasize that the timing of the Exodus was part of a divine plan written in the heavens, revealing a profound connection between the sacred calendar, divine law, and the historical destiny of Israel, aligned with a predetermined cosmic schedule woven into the universal laws. The story of the Exodus transcends mere historical records, becoming an integral thread within the spiritual essence of creation itself. The 10 plagues narrated in Exodus chapters 7 through 12 serve as more than just displays of divine authority meant to compel Pharaoh to free the Israelites. They are imbued with cosmic significance. These plagues are portrayed not only as divine acts of judgment, but also as emblematic gestures, symbolizing the fall of Egypt's deities and the suppression of the spiritual forces that underpin them. According to Jubilees, each plague was intentionally directed at disempowering the false gods of Egypt, illustrating that true sovereignty resides solely with the God of Israel, who holds dominion over both heaven and earth. Every affliction was a deliberate strike against not only Pharaoh himself, but also against the spiritual entities governing Egypt's religious system, targeting the dark powers that sought to enslave Israel. The Lord's sending of these plagues was thus a dual act. On one level, a judgment upon Egypt's ruler, and on another, a demonstration that the gods revered by Egypt were merely illusory, powerless before the supreme authority of the Most High. These events form part of a broader cosmic battle between good and evil, in which the God of Israel triumphs over both the physical and spiritual forces aligned against his will. Jubilees also posits that Mimar and his malevolent cohorts operated covertly to hinder Pharaoh's willingness to free Israel. But ultimately, divine power proved superior, overpowering these dark agents at every strategic point. In the biblical account of Exodus, Moses is depicted as receiving God's commands directly on Mount Sinai, a moment of divine revelation. Jubilees enrich this narrative by revealing that these divine laws were not fashioned spontaneously at that moment, but had been inscribed long beforehand upon the heavenly tablets, an eternal record stored in the heavenly realm. These tablets are described as a cosmic ledger of all divine laws, established at the dawn of creation itself, serving as directives for both angels and humankind. Jubilees emphasizes that Moses was merely the human vessel chosen to receive these preordained laws. The laws themselves existed in a divine blueprint before Moses' mission. Consequently, the Mosaic Law is portrayed not simply as a set of commandments for Israel, but as part of a divine, universal order governing all existence. Its principles were always intended to be unveiled at the appropriate divine moment, synchronized with the sacred calendar. The law and the testimony were inscribed on these celestial tablets even before the foundation of the world, created through divine decree to serve as a guiding framework for all generations of Israel's descendants. The biblical story in Exodus, focusing on the dramatic revelation at Mount Sinai, intersects with Jubilees' view that these laws originate from a cosmic plan already written in heaven, waiting for a divinely appointed time for their earthly manifestation. One of the most compelling insights Jubilees offers is its assertion that the Mosaic Law was practiced long before Moses received it officially. While traditional biblical tradition depicts Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as righteous patriarchs, it does not explicitly state that they were recipients of the full divine law. Instead, their righteousness is often highlighted without detailed mention of adherence to specific commandments. Jubilees, however, claim that the patriarchs already observed many aspects of the law, such as Sabbath keeping, sacrifices, and certain ethical principles that would later be formalized as commandments given through Moses. This suggests that the laws given at Sinai were not entirely novel inventions, but rather the restoration or continuation of laws passed down from the earliest human generations. These laws were conveyed through divine revelations and angels guiding the patriarchs. For instance, Abraham is described as having observed the Sabbath and obeyed dietary laws long before these were formally enacted for Israel. He circumcised his sons and followed many of the biblical commandments, indicating that the moral and spiritual code was already known and practiced by the patriarchs, serving as a fulfillment rather than an invention of later times. This perspective aligns with the idea that the Mosaic Law is a reaffirmation of an ancient divine order, a universal set of commandments that have persisted from creation, awaiting the appropriate moment for their full manifestation among God's chosen people. The divine commandments inscribed on the heavenly tablets, along with the law that was revealed to him through God's angels, are highlighted in Jubilees 16:28. In this depiction, Jubilees portrays the law as an ageless and universal code that has been bestowed upon all righteous beings from the time of Adam onward. Moses is identified as the chosen individual tasked with receiving and delivering this divine law in its entirety to the nation of Israel. One of Jubilees' most distinctive contributions to the narrative surrounding the Mosaic law is its emphasis on the cosmic calendar. Within Jubilees, the proper observance of time, especially the Sabbath, festivals and Jubilee years, is considered fundamental to maintaining divine order. These temporal laws are presented as inscribed on the heavenly tablets, and adherence to them is viewed as a means of harmonizing human existence with the divine rhythm that governs the universe. Jubilees notably promote the solar calendar over the lunar one, defining a year as consisting of 364 days. This calendar system is regarded as the correct method of observing God's commandments, ensuring that religious festivals and sacred rest days occur on the precise appointed days. Jubilees cautions that straying from this divine timetable can cause spiritual disorder, which underscores the central importance of the laws governing time in the Mosaic tradition. It emphasizes that these laws are not merely administrative, but are integral to God's overarching plan for creation. In Jubilees, God's instruction to Moses includes a command to record the laws concerning the Sabbath and the festivals explicitly, because these appointed times are inscribed on the heavenly tablets. The faithful are commanded to observe them meticulously, as neglecting them could result in errors and deviations from the divine order. Jubilees 52. The text underscores a belief that aligning one's life with this cosmic calendar is essential for maintaining divine favor, as it ensures synchronization with God's divine plan for the universe. While the biblical narrative mentions the Sabbath and festivals, it does not explore their cosmic or celestial origins to the same degree. Jubilees, however, explicitly link adherence to this lunar-solar schedule with spiritual harmony and fidelity to divine commandments. Its emphasis on the cosmic calendar's significance elevates the observance from mere tradition to a vital spiritual act that aligns humanity with the divine order. Furthermore, Jubilees presents a universal perspective on these divine laws, extending their scope beyond Israel. While the Mosaic law in the biblical canon is typically understood as a covenant given specifically to Israel, Jubilees depicts these laws as eternal and binding for all of God's creations. The laws inscribed on the heavenly tablets are portrayed as everlasting directives that govern not only physical and earthly matters, but also the spiritual realm. The angels are depicted as participating in this divine order, keeping the Sabbath and observing divine festivals in heaven, thus positioning the Mosaic law within a broader universal framework. This perspective makes the law part of the divine cosmic order rather than a purely earthly enactment, connecting spiritual and material realms through divine ordinance. According to Jubilees, the law delivered to Moses is eternal and universal, extending its observance to angels in heaven and righteous humans on earth who will perpetually hold to the commandments. Jubilees 50:13. This concept of an unending divine law is less explicit in the traditional biblical texts, which tend to emphasize the covenant relationship between God and Israel. However, Jubilees elaborates that the divine laws are embedded into the very fabric of the universe, binding all celestial and terrestrial beings to God's cosmic order. The future of Israel is not left to chance, but is anticipated within a divinely ordained timeline, inscribed on the heavenly tablets from the beginning of time. This predestined timeline maps out the rise and fall of nations, the exile and restoration of Israel, and the final judgment that will encompass all creation. Every event in human history, from creation to the ultimate divine judgment, purportedly follows this celestial schedule stored in heaven. A distinctive element of Jubilees is its assertion that these divine events are predestined. Nothing transpires outside of this divine plan, reinforcing the idea of divine sovereignty over history. This portrayal emphasizes that history itself is part of a divine blueprint, written in heaven long before it unfolds, further asserting the eternality and universality of God's commandments and divine order. The divine purpose established by God, as depicted in the book, offers a prophetic outline of Israel's journey, illustrating that their periods of exile, suffering, and ultimate restoration are all inscribed within the heavenly archives. These events are set to unfold by the divine timetable, a plan meticulously recorded on celestial tablets. Everything from Israel's rebellion to their redemption, including the specific timings for their deliverance, has been predestined long ago, as referenced in Jubilees 23:32. While Genesis and Exodus focus on particular episodes within Israel's historical narrative, Jubilees broaden this perspective by illustrating that Israel's destiny is part of a grander cosmic scheme that was predetermined from the beginning. The text underscores that Israel's future is intricately linked to a universal divine plan that encompasses both spiritual and earthly dimensions. Throughout Israel's history, angels are depicted as playing vital roles, but their significance intensifies in the eschatological end times context. In Jubilees, celestial beings, specifically the angels of the Lord, are portrayed as executing divine justice upon the nations, ensuring that God's divine will is fulfilled both in heaven and on earth. As the expected end approaches, Jubilees describe how angels will descend from the heavens to carry out a divine separation, gathering the faithful and righteous individuals while removing the wicked. This process involves the divine forces sorting and gathering those who have remained loyal to God's commandments, faithfully fulfilling God's plan of justice. The text also introduces the concept of Metima, the leader of the evil spirits, who will be ultimately bound and confined into the abyss, symbolizing the final defeat of darkness and evil. These evil spirits, led by Metima, are destined to be restrained until the final judgment, at which point they will be permanently destroyed. The Lord's angels will also be tasked with assembling his chosen people, binding the Prince of Darkness, Metima, and casting him into the abyss until the appointed day of reckoning, when he will be destroyed forever, as referenced in Jubilees 23:29. This depiction of angels as agents of divine justice infuses the end times prophecy with a unique perspective, emphasizing their role not just as messengers, but as active enforcers of God's retributive and restorative justice. While traditional biblical texts generally reference angels within the context of judgment, such as in Revelation, Jubilees offer a detailed portrayal of their involvement in the spiritual warfare that characterizes the last days. The book emphasizes that angels will participate actively in cleansing and purifying the earth and nations, executing divine judgment and aiding in the fulfillment of God's ultimate plan. One of the most central themes within Jubilees is the prophetic vision of Israel's eventual redemption. Despite their repeated rebellion and exile, the book reassures that God's predetermined moment of restoration remains fixed. This renewal is not merely political, but is fundamentally spiritual, aligning with the cosmic blueprint inscribed on the heavenly tablets. According to Jubilees, Israel's healing and restoration will follow a time of great tribulation, during which the nation will undergo purification, the law will be re-established, and the people will return to faithfulness and holiness. This spiritual revival prepares the nation for the coming of the Messiah and the subsequent establishment of God's eternal kingdom on earth. The prophecy foretells a future when the children of Israel will wholeheartedly turn back to the Lord. As they do, God will gather them from the nations and re-establish them in their ancestral land, fulfilling what is inscribed on the celestial tablets. While the traditional biblical scriptures, such as Isaiah and Jeremiah, also speak of Israel's restoration, Jubilees add the crucial detail that this process is part of a divine schedule preordained long before, with specific events already recorded in heavenly records. These events serve as milestones in the divine plan, emphasizing the certainty and divine guarantee of Israel's return. In the eschatological vision, Jubilees describe a future when a messianic kingdom will be established. This kingdom, ruled by the Anointed One, commonly understood as the Messiah, will usher in righteousness and justice on the earth. Emphasizing the significance of this period, Jubilees states that this righteous dominion will bring about the end of the current age and inaugurate God's eternal reign. During this time, divine law will be fully honored and observed, and the righteous will inherit the earth, living in harmony under God's sovereignty. The final judgment, as depicted in Jubilees, involves the decisive separation of the righteous from the wicked. Those who are deemed unrighteous will be cast into the lake of fire, symbolizing their ultimate condemning and destruction, destroyed forever, along with the corrupt spirits led by Matima. This apocalyptic event signifies the culmination of divine justice, where evil will be permanently eradicated and righteousness established in its place, culminating in the full realization of God's eternal kingdom. In the end times, evil will be overcome, and the Messiah will reign with justice and peace. This eschatological vision aligns with the apocalyptic imagery presented in the Book of Revelation. However, the Book of Jubilees emphasizes the importance of divine law and the re-establishment of the cosmic order even more strongly. It portrays a future where the Lord establishes his kingdom upon the earth, and the righteous will govern alongside him, for the law will be inscribed on their hearts. The wicked, meanwhile, will be cast into the lake of fire, as described in Jubilees 50:13. The Messianic kingdom depicted in Jubilees offers a picture of a renewed creation in which obedience to God's commandments is fully upheld, and those who remain faithful are rewarded. The final judgment will eradicate evil, ushering in an age of everlasting tranquility. If you found this exploration of the Book of Jubilees and its distinctive cosmic perspective on biblical history insightful, please consider sharing this video with others who might be interested in uncovering these profound spiritual mysteries. By sharing, you support our efforts to study ancient texts and uncover the hidden layers of God's eternal plan. Remember to like, subscribe to Deep Bible Stories, and join the discussion in the comments. Together, we can continue to delve deeper into these captivating biblical truths.